What if I told you that one man's journey could change the course of history? A man whose life was marked by deception, yet whose story reveals a profound truth about redemption and divine purpose. Jacob's life is more than just a series of biblical events. It's a mirror of our own struggles, choices, and moments of transformation. Imagine facing betrayal by your own family, wrestling with God Himself, and emerging with a new identity that would shape generations. Sounds impossible, right? Yet, Jacob's story shows us that our flaws, our failures, and even our darkest moments can lead to the greatest revelations. What if the very things you've been running from are the keys to your future? Jacob's story is proof that no matter how broken the path may seem, there is a divine purpose waiting to unfold. Keep reading, and you'll discover the hidden lessons in his journey. Lessons that just might change the way you see your own life. Jacob's life stands as a vivid illustration of the complexity in human nature. He was a man whose faith was tested repeatedly, yet his story reminds us that even the most flawed individuals can serve a divine purpose. It's a powerful reflection on the duality we all carry: faith on one side, deception on the other. Think about how, in your own life, you've faced moments where your intentions were pure, but your actions didn't always follow suit. Jacob's tale resonates because it is a reminder that mistakes don't disqualify us from fulfilling our destiny. His journey began with a prophecy that set a chain of events in motion, but at each turn, Jacob faced challenges that would test both his character and his faith. He was driven by a divine purpose, yet his path was far from straight. There's something familiar about the tension between striving for a higher calling while battling personal flaws. It's the same struggle many face today, trying to reconcile who they want to be with who they are. Jacob's narrative gives hope to anyone who feels burdened by their imperfections. But let's pause and consider what this means for us. Jacob didn't always make the right choices. In fact, his actions were often deceitful, driven by fear and desperation. And yet, his story is one of redemption. It's as if his life whispers a truth to us, that redemption is not about perfection, but about perseverance and faith. This idea leads us into the next chapter of his life, where the foundations of his struggles were laid even before his birth. Isaac's quiet strength shines through in this chapter of his life. Though his wife Rebekah was barren, Isaac didn't succumb to despair. He prayed earnestly for her, showing a deep trust in God's plan despite the uncertainty. This act of faith wasn't just a moment of religious devotion. It was a powerful example of persistence in the face of hopelessness. We can all relate to situations where the answers we seek seem distant. Isaac's prayer teaches us that faith doesn't always bring immediate results, but it is a steady force that sustains us in times of waiting. Rebekah's eventual pregnancy was a joyful event, but it carried the weight of prophecy. The news of her conception came with a divine message, foretelling the struggle between her future sons, Esau and Jacob. Even before their birth, the tension that would define their relationship was set in motion. This is a reminder of how the seeds of conflict can be planted early in our lives, sometimes before we even understand them. For many, family dynamics carry this kind of unseen tension, shaping futures in ways we can't always control. What's fascinating here is the way Isaac and Rebekah's roles differ. Isaac, steadfast in his faith, seems to accept the challenges to come, while Rebekah becomes more directly involved in shaping the outcome of the prophecy. Their differing approaches mirror the balance between patience and action in life. Sometimes, like Isaac, we're called to wait and trust. Other times, like Rebekah, we feel compelled to intervene. The trick is knowing when to act and when to step back. Their twins, Esau and Jacob, were destined for conflict from the start. Even in the womb, their struggle began. Rebekah could feel them wrestling inside her, a physical manifestation of the spiritual and emotional battles that would follow. It's a vivid picture of how some conflicts in life seem unavoidable, born out of forces beyond our control. But as the story unfolds, we see how these early struggles shape the characters of both sons. For Isaac and Rebekah, the birth of their twins marked not just the fulfillment of Isaac's prayers, but the beginning of a family saga that would stretch across generations. Their story reminds us that blessings often come with challenges, and the answers to our prayers may bring with them new trials. Isaac's faith was rewarded, but his role as a father would be tested in ways he couldn't have anticipated. We see here the delicate balance of family dynamics. Isaac, more passive, and Rebekah, more active in her role, show how two people can experience the same events in vastly different ways. Their approaches offer us a chance to reflect on our own roles within our families. whether we are the ones who wait patiently or the ones who feel the need to step in and shape the outcome. The story of Isaac and Rebekah also hints at the complexities of parental favoritism. Though subtle at this point, the preferences that would later divide their household are beginning to emerge. Isaac's quiet support for Esau and Rebekah's preference for Jacob foreshadow the rift that will deepen as their sons grow older. And this leads us directly to the prophecy that set everything in motion. Before Jacob and Esau took their first breath, their destinies had already been foretold. Rebekah's experience was unlike any other, receiving a direct prophecy from God about her unborn sons. The message was clear: 2 nations are in your womb. The older will serve the younger. This prophecy set the stage for a rivalry that would shape their lives and the history of their descendants. It's fascinating to think about how, even before we understand the world, certain paths are laid out for us. In life, we often walk roads influenced by forces beyond our control, just as Jacob and Esau did. The weight of this prophecy wasn't just a matter of sibling rivalry. It was a declaration that defied cultural norms. In the ancient world, the firstborn son was entitled to privileges, blessings, and authority. Yet, in this case, God had other plans. Esau, the elder, would eventually serve Jacob, the younger. This was a radical departure from tradition, teaching us that divine purpose can often challenge human expectations. When we think about our own lives, we must remember that not everything follows the script society has written for us. Sometimes, we are called to roles or paths that seem unconventional, but are nonetheless essential to a greater plan. Rebekah, knowing the prophecy, would carry this knowledge in her heart, influencing the decisions she made regarding her sons. It's easy to imagine the tension this knowledge must have caused. How does one raise 2 sons, knowing that one is destined to dominate the other? This situation reveals the burdens that sometimes come with knowing too much. Often, when we are aware of the future, even in small glimpses, it can affect the way we act in the present. For Rebekah, this foresight played a key role in the choices she made as a mother. This prophecy also highlights an important truth about life. Not all conflicts are born of circumstance. Sometimes, they are rooted in destiny. Jacob and Esau were bound to clash, not just because of their personalities or decisions, but because their fates were intertwined from the beginning. It's a powerful reminder that while we have control over our actions, some struggles are inevitable. What matters is how we navigate these challenges, whether we rise above them or become consumed by them. Jacob, though younger, would eventually seize the opportunities before him, but his journey would be marked by constant tension with his brother. As we look at the lives of Jacob and Esau, it's worth reflecting on how the tension between destiny and choice plays out in our own lives. Are there conflicts we face that feel inevitable, as if they've been with us since birth? Do we have the power to change the narrative, or are we simply playing out a role assigned to us by forces beyond our control? These are questions that Jacob and Esau's story invites us to ask, even as we watch their rivalry unfold. Interestingly, this prophecy also sets up the broader theme of inversion that runs throughout the Bible, where the least expected often rise to prominence. Just as Jacob would supplant Esau, so too would David, the youngest of his brothers, become king. The story invites us to reconsider our expectations about who is worthy of greatness. The prophecy wasn't just about 2 brothers. It was about redefining the notion of power and authority. For Rebekah, the knowledge of this prophecy likely weighed heavily on her as she navigated the complexities of motherhood. She must have felt torn, knowing that her favoritism toward Jacob wasn't just personal, but divinely sanctioned. And yet, the prophecy didn't eliminate her responsibility. It merely set the framework for the choices she would make, choices that would ripple through the generations. As we move forward in the story, we begin to see how this prophecy plays out in the lives of Jacob and Esau. The rivalry between the brothers takes a dramatic turn, and it all begins with a simple, impulsive decision that would forever alter the course of their lives. Esau's decision to sell his birthright for a bowl of stew is one of the most striking moments in his life. In a moment of hunger and exhaustion, he gave up something of immense value for immediate satisfaction. This impulsive act reveals much about his character. He lived for the moment, driven by his physical desires rather than by long-term thinking. It's a lesson that resonates with anyone who has ever made a hasty decision they later regret. How often do we trade something important for quick gratification, only to realize later the depth of what we've lost? Jacob, on the other hand, demonstrated a sharp mind and a calculated nature. He saw the opportunity in his brother's weakness and seized it without hesitation. While Esau was focused on filling his stomach, Jacob was thinking about his future. It's easy to judge Jacob's actions as manipulative, but there's also a certain wisdom in his approach. He understood the value of the birthright, something Esau took for granted. In life, the opportunities we don't recognize can often be the ones that shape our destinies, and Jacob was fully aware of this. This moment between the brothers highlights the importance of understanding value, both in material terms and in terms of our broader life goals. Esau's birthright wasn't just about inheritance. It represented his future, his role in the family, and his connection to God's promises. By giving it away so easily, he showed a disregard for the spiritual and familial weight of the birthright. It's a powerful reminder that we must be careful with the things we value. What might seem insignificant in the moment can carry much greater meaning in the long run. Esau's impulsive decision is a timeless lesson in the dangers of short-term thinking. We see this play out in many areas of life, whether it's financial decisions, relationships, or career choices. How many times have people sacrificed their long-term well-being for immediate satisfaction? This is where the story becomes deeply relevant to us. Esau's mistake isn't unique to him. It's a human flaw that we all battle with at some point. The challenge is learning to pause, to think beyond the present moment, and to consider the bigger picture before making choices that could alter our future. Jacob's cunning in this situation also speaks to a deeper truth about human nature. There are times when we must be strategic. Life often presents us with opportunities that may seem small, but have the potential to shape our path in significant ways. Jacob understood this, and he used his intellect to secure his future. It's a reminder that wisdom often comes in recognizing opportunities where others see only the mundane. Jacob's action, while morally questionable, reflects a certain level of foresight that is essential in navigating life's complexities. This event between Jacob and Esau also marks a turning point in their relationship. The bond between brothers, already strained, was now broken by this exchange. Trust was shattered, and the seeds of future conflict were sown. But in this act, we also see the unfolding of God's plan. Jacob, the younger, was now positioned to take the role that had been prophesied. It's a moment where human actions, even those driven by deceit or impulse, serve a larger divine purpose. Esau's loss of the birthright was not just a personal failure. It had generational implications. What he gave up in that moment would echo through the lives of his descendants. This is a sobering reminder that our choices, particularly the ones made in haste, can affect more than just ourselves. The legacy we leave is shaped by the decisions we make, and sometimes the smallest actions carry the greatest consequences. Jacob's acquisition of the birthright set the stage for his future, but it also marked the beginning of a deeper tension between him and Esau. The story of their rivalry, which had been simmering since birth, was now reaching a boiling point. As we move forward, the tension escalates even further, leading to a moment of deception that would change the course of both their lives forever. The moment Jacob deceived his father Isaac marked one of the most pivotal and controversial episodes in his life. With Rebekah's guidance, Jacob tricked his blind father into giving him the blessing that was meant for Esau. The blessing wasn't just words. It was a transfer of power, favor, and destiny. For Isaac, who trusted his son's voice, the deception was complete. Jacob, covered in goat skins to mimic Esau's hairy arms, manipulated a situation to his advantage. This act of deceit set a chain of events in motion that would impact generations, showing how even the closest relationships can be tainted by ambition. Rebekah's role in the deception adds an interesting layer to the story. She wasn't just a passive observer, she orchestrated the entire event. Knowing the prophecy that the younger would serve the older, Rebekah acted out of what she believed was divine necessity. It's easy to judge her actions, but her motivations were deeply tied to her understanding of God's will. As a mother, she sought to secure Jacob's future, even if it meant deceiving her husband and betraying her other son. This brings up the complex question of whether the ends justify the means, especially when one feels they are carrying out a higher purpose. Jacob's deception wasn't just about claiming Esau's blessing. It was about taking a destiny that had been prophesied. But his actions show the moral complexities of pursuing that destiny. How often do we feel the need to bend the rules or manipulate circumstances to achieve what we believe is rightfully ours? Jacob's story forces us to reflect on the ethical dilemmas we face when trying to secure our future. Is it better to wait for things to unfold naturally, or should we take matters into our own hands, even if it means hurting those we love? The tension between faith and control is a central theme here. one that plays out in many of our own lives. Isaac's vulnerability as a blind father adds a tragic element to this story. He trusted his senses, and yet they betrayed him. This moment reflects how easily we can be deceived when we rely solely on external appearances. Isaac's blindness wasn't just physical. It was also symbolic of his inability to see the deeper dynamics unfolding within his family. It's a reminder that we must look beyond what we can physically see to understand the full picture, whether in our relationships, decisions, or spiritual lives. Deception often thrives in the gaps where trust is most fragile. The weight of this deception had immediate consequences. When Esau discovered that his blessing had been stolen, his grief and anger were overwhelming. For Esau, it wasn't just a loss of material inheritance, it was a loss of identity, of the future he had expected to live. His reaction, filled with rage and a desire for revenge, marked the beginning of a dark chapter in the brothers' relationship. Esau's pain speaks to anyone who has ever felt robbed of something they believed was rightfully theirs, whether through deception or betrayal. But this story isn't just about betrayal, it's also about the cost of ambition. Jacob may have succeeded in securing the blessing, but the consequences of his actions would haunt him. The deception that he carried out under his mother's guidance would lead to years of separation from his family, a life of running, and ultimately, a deeper confrontation with himself and with God. It's a sobering reminder that while we may achieve our goals through manipulation, the price we pay in the end may be far greater than the reward. The deception of Isaac also fulfilled the prophecy given to Rebekah, showing that God's plans can come to pass even through flawed human actions. This raises profound questions about the nature of divine purpose. Can it coexist with human imperfection? Jacob's story suggests that even when we take morally questionable paths, there is still room for redemption. But before Jacob could reach that redemption, he had to face the consequences of his choices. Esau's anger would force Jacob to flee, setting him on a journey of transformation. As we move forward in the story, the consequences of this deception grow more severe. Esau's anger turned to thoughts of murder, and Jacob, now burdened with both the blessing and the guilt, had no choice but to run. His flight marked the beginning of a journey not just of survival, but of spiritual awakening. Esau's fury after losing his father's blessing was immediate and intense. The betrayal cut deep, not just because of the stolen blessing, but because it was his own brother, Jacob, who had deceived him. In his anger, Esau vowed to kill Jacob, setting the stage for a dramatic shift in both their lives. It's a powerful reminder of how unchecked emotions, especially anger, can lead to thoughts and actions that we later regret. Esau's reaction is all too human. When we feel betrayed or wronged, it's easy to let our emotions drive us toward revenge, even when it comes at great personal cost. Jacob, aware of Esau's rage, had no choice but to flee. This marked the beginning of a long journey, both physically and spiritually, for Jacob. He wasn't just running from his brother. He was also running from the consequences of his actions. Jacob's flight represents a common theme in life. Sometimes, when we make decisions that hurt others, we must confront the fallout. And while running might seem like the easiest option, it's often the first step toward facing deeper truths about ourselves. Jacob's escape wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation. Rebekah, knowing the danger her son was in, urged him to leave for her family's home, where he would be safe. This separation between Jacob and Esau was not just physical but emotional, creating a rift that would take years to heal. Jacob's journey to Laban's house was the beginning of a new chapter, but it was also a consequence of his previous actions. It's a reminder that the choices we make today can affect the course of our lives for years to come. Jacob's flight may have been necessary, but it came with a heavy cost, the loss of his family and the life he once knew. Jacob's flight also signals the start of his transformation. Up until this point, Jacob had been defined by his cunning and his willingness to deceive to achieve his goals. But in running from Esau, he would be forced to confront the consequences of his actions in a new way. His journey would be one of growth, not just physically as he traveled to new lands, but spiritually as he wrestled with his own identity and relationship with God. Sometimes, it's in the act of fleeing that we begin the process of self-discovery, as Jacob would soon find out. Interestingly, Jacob's journey away from home mirrors the experiences of many who leave behind familiar surroundings in search of something greater. For Jacob, the road ahead was filled with uncertainty. He didn't know what awaited him in his uncle Laban's house, but he had little choice but to move forward. Life often presents us with these moments where the only way is forward, even when we feel unprepared. Jacob's story reminds us that while the path may be difficult, it's often on these uncertain roads that we discover who we really are. Esau's desire for revenge also speaks to the destructive power of anger. While Jacob was fleeing, Esau was left to grapple with his bitterness. His anger, though justified, was consuming him. It's a lesson in the dangers of letting anger dictate our actions. Esau's vow to kill Jacob may have felt like the only way to right the wrong, but in reality, it would have only deepened the divide. We see in Esau's response the universal struggle of finding a way to deal with betrayal without becoming consumed by it. Forgiveness may seem impossible in moments of rage, but as we will see later in the story, it is the only path to true healing. Jacob's flight also represents the human instinct to run from conflict. But as much as we may try to escape, we can't outrun the consequences of our actions. Jacob's journey was one of transformation, but it was also a path toward reconciliation, not just with Esau, but with himself and with God. His time in exile would serve as a period of growth, shaping him into the man he needed to become. And yet, even as he fled, the shadow of his past loomed large, reminding him that one day, he would have to face his brother again. As we continue Jacob's journey, we begin to see the first steps of his spiritual transformation. Alone and vulnerable, Jacob experiences a divine encounter that would change the course of his life forever. In the midst of his flight, Jacob found himself in a desolate place, alone and uncertain of what the future held. As night fell, he laid his head on a stone to sleep, unaware that this moment would become one of the most significant in his life. It was here that Jacob had a divine encounter, a dream of a stairway reaching from earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending. At the top stood the Lord, who spoke directly to Jacob, reaffirming the promises made to his forefathers, Abraham and Isaac. This vision wasn't just a comforting dream, it was a turning point in Jacob's spiritual journey. The stairway in Jacob's dream is rich with symbolism. It represents the connection between heaven and earth, a bridge between the divine and the human. For Jacob, who had spent much of his life deceiving others to achieve his goals, this encounter with God was a reminder that his destiny was not solely in his hands. There was a higher power at work, guiding his path even in the midst of his mistakes. This moment of divine revelation marks the beginning of Jacob's transformation from a cunning, self-reliant man to one who would rely more deeply on God's promises and guidance. God's message to Jacob in the dream was clear. The land he was lying on would be given to him and his descendants, and through his offspring, all nations would be blessed. This reaffirmation of the covenant made to Abraham was a powerful reminder to Jacob that despite his flaws and past actions, God's promises remained steadfast. It's a comforting thought for anyone who feels burdened by their past. God's plans for us are not derailed by our mistakes. Jacob's encounter with the divine shows that even in moments of uncertainty and fear, we are never truly alone. This dream also served as a wake-up call for Jacob. Up until this point, he had been running from Esau, running from his past, and perhaps even running from himself. But now, in this desolate place, he was forced to confront a higher reality. The stairway to heaven wasn't just a vision of angels. It was a reminder that there was more at stake than his immediate circumstances. It's a powerful lesson for all of us. Sometimes, in our darkest moments, we are given glimpses of a greater purpose. These moments of clarity can serve as turning points in our lives, shifting our focus from the here and now to the bigger picture. Jacob's response to this divine encounter was profound. When he awoke, he declared, "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it." He took the stone he had used as a pillow and set it up as a pillar, anointing it with oil, and naming the place Bethel, meaning house of God. This act of devotion was a sign of Jacob's growing spiritual awareness. He was no longer just a man on the run. He was a man who had encountered the divine and was forever changed by it. In naming the place Bethel, Jacob acknowledged that this was a sacred space, a place where heaven had touched earth. What's interesting about this moment is that Jacob, while deeply moved by the encounter, didn't immediately transform into a perfect man of faith. His journey toward full reliance on God would take time, with many more trials and tests along the way. But this dream marked the beginning of that process. It's a reminder that spiritual growth is often a gradual process, filled with moments of revelation, but also setbacks and struggles. Jacob's story encourages us to be patient with ourselves as we walk our own spiritual paths, trusting that each step brings us closer to our divine purpose. The stairway to heaven also represents the idea that there is always a way to connect with the divine, no matter how far we've strayed. For Jacob, who had spent much of his life scheming and deceiving, this dream was a reminder that God was still with him, offering a path forward. It's a message of hope for anyone who feels lost or disconnected from their faith. No matter how far we've wandered, the way back is always open. Jacob's story teaches us that redemption is always within reach, even in the most unlikely places. Jacob's divine encounter didn't just reassure him of God's presence. It set him on a new course. From this moment on, Jacob's life would be marked by a growing reliance on God's promises, even as he continued to face challenges and deception. His journey was far from over, but this dream gave him the strength to move forward with a renewed sense of purpose. As Jacob continued on his path, he would face many more trials, but he would no longer face them alone. As we move forward in Jacob's story, we come to a defining moment in his life, an intense, physical encounter that would change not just his name, but his identity. Jacob's journey led him to one of the most mysterious and transformative events in his life, the night he wrestled with God. This wasn't a metaphorical struggle, it was a physical battle, one that took place under the cover of darkness by the Jabbok River. As Jacob stood on the verge of reuniting with Esau, the tension of his past and the uncertainty of his future collided. In the dead of night, a figure appeared, and Jacob found himself locked in a struggle unlike any other. This was not just a fight for survival. It was a struggle for identity, for redemption, and for blessing. What's striking about this moment is Jacob's relentless determination. All night long, he wrestled with the divine being, refusing to let go even when his hip was dislocated. It's a vivid picture of how we, too, often wrestle with God, struggling to understand His will, to accept His plans, or to find peace in the midst of our own turmoil. Jacob's refusal to surrender speaks to the human desire for control, for answers, and for blessings that we feel are just out of reach. And yet, this encounter shows that sometimes, it's in the struggle that we are transformed. The wrestling match also highlights Jacob's tenacity. He had spent his entire life fighting, for his birthright, for his blessing, for his place in the world. But this struggle was different. In this moment, Jacob wasn't just fighting for material gain. He was fighting for something deeper, a new identity, a new relationship with God. The divine being could have overpowered him at any moment, but the struggle was necessary for Jacob's growth. It's a reminder that sometimes, God allows us to wrestle with Him, not because He can't defeat us, but because the struggle is where we are refined. When dawn broke, the divine being told Jacob to let go, but Jacob, in a final act of persistence, refused unless he received a blessing. This moment is key to understanding Jacob's character. He was not content to leave the encounter unchanged. He demanded more, and in return, he received something far greater than he could have anticipated: a new name. The divine being renamed him Israel, meaning one who struggles with God, a name that would not only define Jacob but also his descendants. This renaming was a powerful act, symbolizing Jacob's transformation from a man defined by deception to one who was defined by his relationship with God. The name Israel carries profound significance. It represents the idea that faith is not passive. It is often a struggle, a wrestling with questions, doubts, and challenges. Jacob's encounter with God teaches us that it's okay to wrestle with our faith, to question and seek understanding. The act of wrestling shows a commitment to the relationship, a refusal to let go even when things are unclear. Jacob's new name is a testament to the fact that his life, and the life of every believer, is marked by moments of struggle that ultimately lead to growth and transformation. This moment in Jacob's life also serves as a reminder that transformation often comes through pain. Jacob's hip was dislocated during the struggle, leaving him with a limp for the rest of his life. This physical injury was a symbol of the inner transformation he had undergone. He would walk with a limp, but he would also walk with a new identity and a new purpose. It's a powerful lesson in how the trials we face leave their marks on us, but those marks can also be signs of our growth. Jacob's limp was a reminder of his encounter with God, a permanent mark of his spiritual journey. The fact that Jacob's struggle took place just before his reunion with Esau is significant. After years of running from his past, Jacob was finally confronting the consequences of his actions. But before he could face Esau, he needed to face himself and God. This wrestling match was a preparation, a necessary encounter to equip Jacob for the reconciliation that was about to take place. It's a reminder that before we can mend broken relationships or move forward in life, we often need to wrestle with the things within us that hold us back. As the sun rose and the divine being departed, Jacob was left changed, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. His struggle had not been in vain. He had received the blessing he sought, but more importantly, he had received a new identity. Jacob's story reminds us that transformation is often painful, but it is also necessary. Through our struggles, we are shaped into who we are meant to be. Now, as Jacob prepared to meet Esau, the stage was set for one of the most emotional moments in his life, an unexpected reconciliation with the brother he had once deceived. The tension leading up to Jacob and Esau's reunion was palpable. Years of estrangement, betrayal, and fear hung in the air as Jacob prepared to meet the brother he had wronged so deeply. Jacob, now a changed man after his wrestling encounter with God, was filled with uncertainty. Would Esau still seek revenge? Would their meeting end in violence, or could there be peace between them after all this time? As Jacob approached, he sent gifts ahead as a gesture of goodwill, hoping to soften Esau's heart. It was a nervous, vulnerable moment, one that many of us can relate to when trying to repair broken relationships. What unfolded next was nothing short of miraculous. Rather than responding with anger, Esau ran to meet Jacob, embracing him with tears. It was an emotional and unexpected display of forgiveness, one that caught Jacob completely off guard. The years of bitterness and revenge that Esau had harbored seemed to melt away in this moment of reconciliation. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes, the forgiveness we seek is closer than we realize. While Jacob had spent years fearing Esau's wrath, Esau had moved on, choosing peace over vengeance. This meeting between Jacob and Esau speaks to the power of forgiveness. For years, their relationship had been defined by deceit, anger, and estrangement. But in this one moment, everything changed. Esau's ability to forgive Jacob is a lesson in letting go of past hurts. It wasn't just for Jacob's sake that Esau forgave. Esau freed himself from the burden of carrying resentment. Forgiveness, as we see here, is not just about absolving the other person. It's about finding freedom for ourselves. By letting go of his desire for revenge, Esau was able to move forward with his life, and so was Jacob. Jacob's response to Esau's forgiveness was one of deep humility and gratitude. He bowed down before Esau, acknowledging the wrongs he had done and expressing his remorse. This act of humility is important. It shows that Jacob understood the weight of his past actions and was willing to humble himself to make things right. It's a lesson in the importance of taking responsibility for our actions. Jacob's willingness to bow before his brother was not just a sign of submission, it was a sign of transformation. He was no longer the scheming man who had stolen Esau's birthright and blessing. He was a man seeking redemption. The reconciliation between Jacob and Esau also highlights the possibility of healing even the deepest wounds. Their relationship, once broken beyond repair, was restored in a way that neither of them could have predicted. It's a hopeful message for anyone struggling with strained family relationships or long-standing conflicts. No matter how much time has passed or how deep the hurt runs, there is always the potential for reconciliation. The story of Jacob and Esau reminds us that healing is possible, even in the most unlikely circumstances. It's also worth noting that this reconciliation didn't erase the past. The pain and betrayal that had occurred were still real, and the consequences of their actions had shaped their lives. But this moment allowed them to move forward without being bound by that past. They didn't need to forget what had happened to forgive each other. This is an important distinction. Reconciliation isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing to move forward despite it. Jacob and Esau's meeting shows us that while we can't change what's been done, we can choose how we respond to it. For Jacob, this reconciliation was not just a personal victory. It was a spiritual one as well. His journey had been marked by deception and estrangement, but now, through forgiveness, he found peace. It's a reminder that our spiritual growth is often tied to our relationships with others. As Jacob made peace with Esau, he was also making peace with himself and with God. The forgiveness he received from his brother was a reflection of the forgiveness he had already begun to experience from God. This reunion also marked a new chapter in both of their lives. Jacob could finally move forward without the fear of Esau's revenge hanging over him, and Esau could live without the burden of bitterness. It was a moment of closure, but also a new beginning for both brothers. The reconciliation between Jacob and Esau shows us that even the most broken relationships can be healed, but it requires humility, forgiveness, and a willingness to let go of the past. As we move forward, we see that Jacob's journey wasn't without further challenges. The cycle of deception that had once defined his life would soon come back around, as Jacob faced betrayal in his own household. Jacob's life seemed to come full circle when he found himself at the receiving end of deception. After fleeing from Esau and finding refuge in his uncle Laban's household, Jacob fell in love with Rachel, Laban's younger daughter. He agreed to work for 7 years in exchange for her hand in marriage, and those years passed quickly because of his love for her. But on the night of the wedding, Laban deceived Jacob by secretly substituting Leah, Rachel's older sister, as the bride. Jacob, the master of deception, had now been deceived. This was a moment of poetic justice, showing that the consequences of his earlier actions were catching up with him. This twist in Jacob's life story is a reminder of the cyclical nature of deception. The very tricks he had used to secure his own future were now being played on him. Laban's cunning mirrored Jacob's own past, and in this moment, Jacob had to confront the reality of his actions. It's a powerful lesson in how the energy we put out into the world, whether deceit, manipulation, or dishonesty, often comes back to us in unexpected ways. Jacob's experience with Laban shows that no one is immune to the consequences of their actions, even when they think they've escaped them. The deception wasn't just a personal betrayal, it altered the course of Jacob's family life. Instead of marrying the woman he loved, Jacob was now bound to Leah, a woman he had not chosen. This marriage set the stage for tension and rivalry between Leah and Rachel, as both sought Jacob's affection and favor. It's a reminder that deception rarely affects only the deceiver and the deceived. Its consequences ripple outward, impacting relationships and creating conflicts that can last for years. For Jacob, the trick played by Laban would lead to years of family strife, as Leah and Rachel vied for his attention and love. Jacob's reaction to the deception was one of outrage, but there was little he could do. Bound by cultural and familial expectations, he agreed to work another 7 years to marry Rachel, the woman he truly loved. This moment reveals the complexity of human relationships and the often unfair bargains we make in life. Jacob's love for Rachel drove him to endure another 7 years of labor, a testament to the power of love but also to the enduring consequences of deception. The years Jacob had once stolen from Esau were now being taken from him, as he worked twice as long to achieve what he had originally been promised. What's particularly striking about this story is how Laban's deception mirrored Jacob's own trickery with Esau and Isaac. Just as Jacob had disguised himself as Esau to receive the blessing, Laban disguised Leah as Rachel to deceive Jacob. The parallel is hard to miss, and it forces us to reflect on how the things we do to others often come back to us. Jacob's journey with Laban shows that while we may think we can outsmart others, we can't escape the broader consequences of our actions. Deception, once set in motion, tends to create a cycle that is difficult to break. The rivalry between Leah and Rachel also serves as a reminder of how deception can poison relationships. Leah, though the legitimate wife, was never Jacob's first choice, and Rachel, the beloved, had to share her husband's love with her sister. This family dynamic, fraught with jealousy and competition, was born out of Laban's deceitful actions. Jacob's love for Rachel, coupled with his obligations to Leah, created a family filled with tension and conflict. It's a reflection of how the choices we make, even when they seem like small deceptions, can have lasting, far-reaching consequences. Laban's trickery also highlights the complexities of family relationships. As Jacob's uncle, Laban should have been someone he could trust, but instead, he became the source of betrayal. This dynamic between family members, where trust is broken and expectations are upended, speaks to the painful reality that sometimes those closest to us are the ones who hurt us the most. Jacob's experience with Laban shows that family ties can be both a source of support and a source of pain, particularly when deception is involved. Jacob's time in Laban's household wasn't just a period of deception and labor, it was also a time of personal growth. As he worked for Laban, Jacob began to understand the cost of deceit, both for himself and for those around him. The years he spent in Laban's service were a time of reflection and transformation, as he grappled with the consequences of his actions and began to see the world in a new light. The man who had once relied on cunning and manipulation to achieve his goals was now learning the value of patience, hard work, and integrity. The deception Jacob faced in Laban's house wasn't the end of his story. It was a chapter that would ultimately shape him into the man he was destined to become. Through the challenges he faced, Jacob's character was refined, preparing him for the next phase of his journey. And as Jacob's family grew, so did the complexity of his relationships, leading to new struggles and revelations that would test his faith and his resolve. Jacob's story isn't just an ancient tale, it's a blueprint for transformation. The struggles, the deception, and the redemption he experienced are the same challenges we face today. But here's the real question. What are you going to do with this knowledge? Are you going to let your past define you, or will you wrestle with it like Jacob did and come out stronger on the other side? Life will always throw challenges your way, but how you respond is what matters. So, what's your next move? How will you use the lessons from Jacob's journey to transform your own life? Don't let this opportunity slip away. Take control of your story, just as Jacob did. And if you want to keep learning and growing, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. There's so much more to explore, and together, we can dive deeper into these powerful lessons. Don't miss out on the next story that could change your life.